Welcome to episode 15 of the Silver Savage podcast. On this episode, Steve and I get together again to discuss what we learned so far from the guest on the Silver Savage podcast. We also discuss the events that took place at the New York City subway. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, April 12th, the day of the attack, and lessons we can all take from it. Hope you enjoy our little chat. For those who still didn't know, both Steve and I are also part of Masada Tactical, an authentic Israeli-based tactics training facility in Maryland. All classes are taught by graduates of the Israeli and American Special Operations and Combat Units and sworn law enforcement officers such as Steve and me. Masada Tactical has classes for tactical operators as well as civilians who just want to get in better shape and learn how to protect themselves and loved ones. I invite you all to come and try a class or a seminar by us. Visit training.masadatactical.com for a list of all our classes and seminars and use the code SILVERSAVAGE10 for 10% off when you sign up for a class. Steven, we're back. We are going to be on for episode 15 when this airs and actually going to drop next week. We're a lot quicker on our turnaround now. Did you think we're going to make it 15 episodes?
I didn't think we were going to make it to 2.
And here we are. And actually, the feedback has been phenomenal still. To the point that I got us new headphones. I wanted to connect it, but I don't have the jack for this thing. This is like professional grade, but I do have a mixer. So
look, it's a long cylindrical object that you stick in a hole. You've obviously mastered that.
Yeah, it's not the putting in the hole I have an issue. It's the pulling it out in time.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it on so I look professional. I can't hear
there you go. They're not connected to anything.
No, nothing. Absolutely nothing.
But you look legit.
There you go. So just so you know, I got 2 of them. So you have one too. And I got 2 new mics. And there's like a little audio box that they all connect to, and semi-pro right here. And we got to finish the
story of my life. JV. Semi-pro. Yeah. Always been JV.
So no, I'll be honest. Aside from the fact that I am impressed with the fact that we made it this far, I mean, this is not what we do. We're not.
No, and I think it's funny because the intention of this was more for our own knowledge and enlightenment, and just to get to know our community. And it's fun. It's fun getting to know people. You know, unfortunately, the celebrities get a lot of the fanfare, but we forget that they're people too. And I think, you know, people get blinded by the whole, you know, aura and the, whatever, the celebrities, so. Yeah, thank you. The whole thing, you know what I mean? Like, but it's nice to hear the everyday stories of everyday people, because as well as I do, heroes don't wear football uniforms or baseball uniforms, although we like to call them heroes. And good for them if you can get paid millions of dollars to wear tights and throw a ball around. I can't do it. But there's heroes all around us. And
did you ever wonder why they wear tights? Why they're called tight ends? Why is there a receiver?
Listen,
I don't know.
There's only 2 sports that I am infatuated with. One is sumo wrestling. Don't ask me why. It's just really impressive to watch these dudes do like beautiful judo throws flawlessly. And the other one is curling, because there's no other sport in the world that can turn a squeegee into a pro athletic tool and look cool doing it.
He probably was started by some housewife somewhere. Like, we're really good at this. Let's make a sport out of it. You're right. But what I was also trying to get at is, not only has this been an enlightening process, as you said, and both of us are out of our element in the sense, coming with questions to this guest, and some of them more naturally than others, but keeping it semi-professional, trying to work all the technology and so forth. It's not really what we do, but it was great, and it was fun. I'm enjoying it. I look forward to all these conversations now.
Yes. And it's funny because I know you're kind of like I am. I think not just when I say that, I think more like veterans, first responders, and just type A personalities that, don't hesitate to help others are typically reclusive in the sense that they never ask for help. They never talk to people. You're always pulling teeth out of my mouth to even a simple, hey, BK, can you come help me with something? I know you're going to say yes, but I never ask you,
Right.
And that's how we are. And to actually go out there and talk to people, it's really refreshing and kind of starts breaking down those barriers that we set up around ourselves. So, like you said, it's pretty cool. It's been pretty enlightening and it's fun. So I'm making new friends every episode.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
For once, it's nice making friends and not enemies.
And I know we said that last time when it was just the two of us, episode 10, that I'm amazed on how many badasses we actually know. Well, I'm not amazed. Knowing our circles, it makes sense. But just hearing the stories is absolutely amazing. And now, as you said, we're making new friends. Next episode, the one that's going to drop after this one, we're having Jason Melnick, who is SWAT officer out of Indiana, who's a star now at SEAL Teams CBS show. So it's pretty cool having people of that caliber now be on our show. So it's been a fun process, and it's only getting better.
Yes.
Now we have to finish the studio that's in my backyard being built.
And I'm gonna have to make a generic one in my basement.
I'm looking forward to something we're going to do from the same room. So we already talked about having one when we had the craft camp in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
That's going to be a big shenanigan.
Yeah. Hopefully, I'm able to walk by then. But that's what my physical therapist is doing a phenomenal job. I'm looking forward to having them on here soon too. I think they treat a lot of people within our community, and I really want to get their word out too. So I know in a few couple weeks we'll have Dr. Jordan and Maddie on, and pretty excited. They're pretty awesome people.
I just want to ask you about sticking needles up your ass and see a dog way.
Oh, it's great because like whenever they're treating me, I get a little noisy because I'm a big baby sometimes. I don't know why. I could sit down in a tattoo chair for 6 hours, but when Dr. Jordan pulls out those dry needles, I panic. And it's funny because the receptionist will come in the office, the masseuse that's in the next room over will come in here, and it becomes like this show. It's like, I'm like,
right, here, everybody come here, sell tickets.
Yeah. So you could ask them whatever you want. It's going to be an interesting conversation because it's I go there for physical therapy, but it becomes mental therapy too with the conversations we have in there. So
doesn't it always?
Yes, I'm looking forward to having them on. They're looking forward to be on. So,
we talk about our experiences and how every time you're around, it becomes a big to do, whether you intend to or not. And we had a lot of martial artists on this podcast recently. So I have to share one story about you and I going to the martial arts super show one year.
Oh, God.
And I'm not going to share details. All I'm saying is, it was funny to show up the next morning and everybody stops and points at us because we were those guys.
There they are. And I just remember looking at you and saying, what the hell did we do?
I don't remember, and it doesn't matter.
Even the Canadians knew who we were.
That was hilarious. So, going through these podcasts and talking to all these people, and you said earlier that we started completely egocentrically, right? We wanted to learn from people, and I think there were a lot of good lessons so far that we gathered, and I started thinking, how are those lessons actually being applied, right? So we're talking about savages. You talk about us as warriors not asking for help even when we need it, right? We talk about skill sets from martial arts to firearms to everything in between, right? And how are we as human beings actually growing from these episodes? Are we learning anything and are we applying it? And what I'm getting at, let's say I'm going to use a timely example, right? We had the unfortunate shooting this morning in New York City, the South.
Yes. And I hit close to me. My best friend. If an hour later he would have been on that same subway, So
yeah, you grew up in that area, didn't you?
Yeah, so that happened in Sunset Park, which is roughly. That was the nicer part of Brooklyn when I was growing up. But 30 minutes away from where I grew up, as the crow flies. But yeah, I know the area.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, like, if any of our listeners were there, right? Not the people we interview, because we know their mindset. If any of them was there, I have no doubt that they would have reacted a certain manner, right? But anybody that listens to us, and today we have over 1,000 downloads, which means a good amount of people actually listens to this. Probably have nothing better to do with their time, but who cares? They listen, and hopefully they learn a thing or two. I'm watching the footage and the pictures, and what hits me most at the time was all these people have their cell phones in their hand. Nobody's doing anything, not fight nor flight.
Right.
They're filming, and I'm like, that's not a warrior or savage mindset.
Hold 1 second. Hey, Eva, and this is going to be in the video.
Hey, put
that bottle up against the door that's down there so it doesn't open. Don't worry about it. I'll explain later. So just so what you're saying, and as a former New Yorker, I will say this: it's definitely partly cultural. One thing about New York City, you've been up there.
Generational though,
and generational, but you got to understand the culture of New York City. You're not gonna have a lot of people like us in the city per se. It just, for some reason, it doesn't happen. Do they exist? Absolutely. I've always talked about, the urban patriot, and the idea of it. But there's not a lot of them there, if that makes any sense, other than your police officers and stuff like that. But the mentality is different. The culture is different. It's very hustle bustle, move fast. You're not going to find a lot of places that are going to teach or supply, that survivalist mentality and equipment that you need. You got to kind of go out a little further to get that mentality. But
right, I think let me stop you for a second. Let me stop you. And I'm sorry, but because you hit on a very good point. People have to seek it in order to get that skill set. Right. So what I'm hoping is, are people that are listening to our podcast, are we changing that culture? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to accomplish, right? We're trying to get these people who may not come from our world to realize, listen, there is a true threat out there. And that threat may be terrorism, may be crime. It may be my neighbor next door. It may be the way I handle my wife, So like we said at the very first intro episode, the battle is not always the same battle, but there's always a battle, right? So are we instilling in people that need, or at least the will, to go and seek that training that you talk of? Because I understand the culture in New York is different.
It is, but all I can say is I hope so. Because here's the misconception. We've talked about, when we started this, that everyone's a warrior within their own right? Whether you fought the battle or not, you should be preparing yourself for a battle, whether that battle is mental, whether it's physical, whether it's a self-defense, doesn't matter. Maybe it's getting the promotion in your next job. That's a battle. And I think people need to redefine that concept. This is why we embrace our silver and tame our savage, as we like to say, because we don't know what the next battle is going to be, but that training that was instilled in us, in the military, law enforcement, in our martial arts training, we've been able to articulate that and apply that to our everyday life, which is something actually that I quoted in the book that we were a part of. It was that gave me the mindset to be vigilant, to be persistent, to be aggressive, and everyone associates, unfortunately, those of us within our community, male, female, doesn't matter. If you served in the military, for some reason, you're this mindless robot, trained to kill. And that's not necessarily the case. We embrace the concept of the warrior poet here at the Silver Savage, and those of us who follow us. So you can get that training. You don't have to train martial arts and be an MMA fighter. That's not what we did. We trained it for the passion of the art, for the community, and to learn how to defend ourselves. But you take those same skills and adapt them to everyday life. And I think if people understood that more, then you'd have more people with that mentality and training and less victims, and more assertiveness, more aggressiveness out there. Rather than holding up the cell phone, you're using that cell phone like a ninja star, and throwing it and at least causing a distraction and buying that precious second to leap over the turnstile, rip out his throat, show it to him before he dies, and stomp on his face. or not. I don't know. We never know what's going to happen, until it actually happens. But at least you can be prepared for it and go through those mental scenarios in your head. You know what I mean? The one thing, though, I will say, and this has always been the history of New Yorkers, they always come together in high stress situations. You see this time and time again, whether it was race riots from the past, blackouts, terrorist attacks, and incidents like this. The one positive that I do want to point out is that a lot of people didn't hesitate to help the other people that were injured. Addressing the actual threat, obviously, that's how we like to think first, take out the threat so that there's not more casualties and victims afterwards. But again, that goes back to what we started this conversation, preparing yourself for that.
Yeah. And training, right? Training goes a long way. So if I'm thinking, what are some parallels that we can draw between our guests? And we talked a little bit about it last time, but obviously we saw perseverance, people that didn't quit, right? It got hard, life got tough and whatnot. And they're like, well, this is not an opportunity to stop. This is an opportunity to push harder, right? So that was one. But the other one is the will to always evolve, always change, and always keep learning. And I think if there's anything we're trying to accomplish, or at least myself, I can't speak for both of us, although oftentimes I do.
We finish each other's sentences and thoughts. I think it's safe to say that.
But I think for myself, it was more of like, okay, if people can take anything out of our conversations with these people, is how they don't stop learning. They keep getting better at their craft or learning something new. It can be a new language, a new skill set, whatever it is, right? So those people that were at the subway station tonight, right? So some of them probably had no skills, and taking the cell phones, it is the modern thing to do because you can put it in social media and maybe sell it to a news media or whatnot and make a lot of money.
And also, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. The footage and the video that they're gathering has been significant in the investigation itself. They've been able to identify suspects from images and basically walk backwards. So yeah, there's positives to it, but again, I still see your side where
I don't think that was
happening. When it's happening, like, why aren't you running for cover, looking for a weapon? No, let me pull out my cell phone and hit record.
I certainly feel that there was a positive outcome off of it, but I don't think that was the intent of the people that pulled the cell phone. I'm going to be a good witness and film things.
But here's the thing, BK. I don't think, and a lot of times, again, because you understanding the culture of the city and in general with the exponential advance of technology, there were probably over 50% of people on that platform who already had their phones out, were face deep in it. And this goes back to, our whole concept of being vigilant, head on a swivel, always knowing your surroundings, etc. But I guarantee you the majority were just like this on their phones, scrolling through the news, doing whatever they were doing when this was going down. So it was a matter of going from that to that, right. That's the new poop moment. It's, grab your phone and it's going, you know what I mean? Yep. So that's the new norm.
I don't disagree. I just feel it's unfortunate from a social standpoint. Now we're talking the demographics of a Silver Savage, right? We're talking about typically people in our age group, our background, our gender. Doesn't have to be, right? And hopefully we're pulling more people that are outside of those circles and bring them into our circle. But those people, I would like to think maybe a little less on their cell phones all the time. Maybe a little bit more head on a swivel, but maybe not. You're right. That comes down to training. So you talk about being vigilant, and I like the fact that you use vigilant because it's a very fine line between vigilant and vigilante, and making that distinction is important, right? So being prepared, being aware is important. Going and taking the law into your own hand is a completely different story.
Right. And I don't think we're advocating that because if
right.
Just being able to notice something that's out of the ordinary might be enough to, instead of hitting record, hitting 911 on your phone, and saying there's a dude standing here with a gas mask in the middle of a subway. That's not normal. I mean, it might be in some parts of New York, but it's not normal.
Perfect. So let's talk about it. Let's try to give our listeners some tools. Because we think fight or flight, which arguably if people did any of those, we were in good shape, right? Most people freeze, or in this case, pull cell phones out and start to hit record, right? But they don't fight nor flight, right? They don't help, they don't assist, they don't run away, which I would think would be a natural response of people when they hear shots fired, right? And you mentioned earlier that you never know what's going to happen until that moment, and you want to 100% correct. I've seen people who are tier one operators going through training, and then the first time they get in contact, they freeze, right? Because it's a whole different world, no doubt. But let's talk about some skills that we can give them so they don't freeze, right? So you talk about, we call behavioral analysis, right? Suspicious behavior. What is outside of the norm, right? And I like talking about it when I teach self-defense and when we teach workplace violence prevention to different industries, because the idea is that norm varies, right? That guy with a gas mask may have fit somewhere else, but it doesn't fit at that subway in Brooklyn, right?
Right, but again, look at the current unfortunate social health, right?
Yeah.
How many people have you seen with giant plastic masks or bags over their heads?
100%. I have a picture of a lady in her 80s in a Jewish kosher supermarket in Maryland, walking around with an Israeli gas mask on, just
right. And that's the thing. Even me, I probably would have looked at him and said, "Man, that dude's really COVID conscious and paranoid." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I might have been one of those who probably pulled out my phone and took a picture of him to text to you and be like, "BK, look at this nut job." You know what I mean?
Exactly what I did with that lady at the grocery store, by the way. But you're correct. So we can base it on one parameter, right? So if we're trying to give people tools, so if there's a baseline that we would consider a norm, right? Mm-hmm. And it can be based on demographics, gender, age groups, ethnicity, and so forth. It can be based on wealth level in a sense. So if there's a neighborhood that everybody always drives, Bentleys and Maseratis and Lamborghinis, and then there's a tiny little Honda Civic driving by. Nothing against Honda Civic, but it doesn't fit the norm, right? So there should be accumulation of parameters essentially that say, okay,
absolutely,
A, B, and C don't match.
Well, even in this situation, having grown up in New York City, I rode the subway, to go to high school, 2 subways every morning, and understanding what a rush hour looks like in New York City, right? Everyone has a purpose. Everyone is moving with a purpose. You're on that platform, you're waiting for the train. So to see someone distant from that platform, that's probably a clue right there, because everyone is on that platform waiting to get into that door first, waiting to find a seat so they can get from point A to point B. You know what I mean? They're always focused either on their own devices or focused on the platform itself and the subway train. If you have someone standing off, which I would assume this person was doing, and from what I've been gathering and reading, because he threw a distractionary device and then attacked. So he was focusing on a bigger picture. He wasn't within the crowd. So you got a person standing away with a gas mask, not rushing during rush hour, things like that stand out, and I think, like you said, those parameters, you find your situation. And again, this is something like a dress rehearsal that you have to do on a regular basis. You know what I mean? What does rush hour look like? Right? What does, something not normal for rush hour look like? That's my morning commute. Right. Yep. Now, lunchtime. What does lunchtime look like? What is not the norm for that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, and how many people do not take the time to be aware of their own routines or the routines of people around them, right? You and I are used to it because we do it for a living. But most people, if you ask them, what does their lunch break look like? They have no idea. They'll have no clue what's going on around them. So I guess that brings you to the next step. So let's say there is a suspicion, something raises those little hairs on the back of our neck, which means something is out there. My body's sensitive. I may not be able to put my finger on what it is, but something doesn't feel right. So not to sound like a cliche, right? But their whole see something, say something, right? I'd much rather people err on the side of caution. And this is me as a security professional talking. Pick up the phone and call 911 about the people with the gas mask. Yeah, it may be COVID sensitive, but he may be a terrorist.
Right.
And I don't want to take that chance. I'll give you an example. Sorry, I know you're about to say something.
No, go ahead.
We teach a PSD class.
Right.
And during sound evolutions, we make those makeshift devices that we hide and see if they're actually doing a search. I can't tell you how many times I walked into Home Depot and I'm buying a pipe and caps and wires and batteries and nails.
Nails.
Right. And I look like a terrorist. I don't speak like
Very
a native.
pretty one, but yeah.
So I'm curious, how many times have I done it and nobody ever called the cops on me? And the one time somebody will, it'll be easy for me to articulate why I got all those things.
And you wouldn't be upset about it.
No, I'd be happy. Somebody's actually paying attention. But people now, because everybody's afraid of being labeled that Islamophobe or homophobe or whatever, right? They don't want to be that person. So they're like, I'm not going to call it in. And that's a cultural change that has to happen.
So, and I was having this conversation with someone earlier about, how, because Israel gets scrutinized a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't know until I knew, and I had the honor and privilege of going there with you. And every time I talk to someone, I always say, I never felt unsafe there. There was not a moment where I felt unsafe in Israel, regardless of the threats of, rockets, which I was looking forward to in a sadistic way. And I know people die from that, so it's not funny, but I just to experience it, just to know what it's like for a citizen in Israel, what they endure, because it lets me articulate empirically whenever I'm defending it more than anything. I like to be able to speak empirically rather than theoretically. But I never felt unsafe. And I talked about how, remember, I kept getting pulled over and I kept getting profiled and I never understood why. And you were telling me, well, you kind of look like, a bad guy.
One of our cousins.
Yeah. But I was never offended. They were very professional. They explained everything. And once they found out I was a dumb American cop, they let me go.
It's funny. When I go with a group of American cops, I usually get pulled over or at least questioned by people when I go through passports, because in the group of American cops, I am that out of the norm person. I'm the only one that's traveling with 2 passports that speaks with an accent. So there's a little more explaining for me to do than somebody else in the group, because in that context, I'm the odd man out.
Right. And again, just to go back, I just, unfortunately, we cater too much to feelings. Feelings are not going to kill you. And I hate to say that, because I don't want to be insensitive. But I've never had a bad word hurt me. Sticks and stones, right? I've never had a word break my bones or put a bullet hole in my chest. And again, that's
what if I told you I don't love you anymore?
Yeah, okay, you got me. You win. I stand corrected. You know what? Just forget everything I just said. Never mind.
Oh, sorry, carry on.
You totally destroyed it.
That would never happen, though. You're good. It's hypothetical.
But again, it goes down to what do we really want to protect here? Is it the preservation of life or the preservation of feelings? Yeah. That's essentially what it comes down to in the most basic and layman's of terms. I'm sorry to say it. I'd rather be safe. I'd rather be patted down by a submachine wielding security guy like in Tel Aviv when I walked into the mall. And I walked into that mall, and guess what? I didn't have to scrutinize anybody in that mall because I know someone already did that for me. Yep. And I was at peace. Unlike here in the US, my neck hurts by the time I leave when I go shopping because I'm scrutinizing everyone and everything in sight. You just don't know when it's going to come. At least in places like that kind of treat their security very aggressively, at least they've already taken down so many layers of anxiety and worry and scrutiny that you can relax a bit, and I'm not saying I'm going to go completely conditioned, unaware, condition white, but at least I can, I know there's a former IDF dude, doing security here. I'm good. And I know he's going to do his job.
Right. And those are just the layers you see. There's so
many
other
correct. Yes.
So the most unsafe I've ever felt was when or not unsafe, but the most on edge was when I went with my family to Disney World. So many people. And I'm looking at it from a terrorist standpoint. This is heaven, right? This is like a candy shop, right? I can go and do whatever. Like, why is Mickey Mouse wearing pants are 7 size too big? I'm like, that's what I'm thinking, right? So I was always in the corner, and everybody's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't feel comfortable here.
So, and it's funny you say that because my wife, she wants to take the kids to Disneyland. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I can't do it. That will probably be my tipping point. I can't do crowds as is already. I would be the guy who's going to tackle Goofy and put Mickey in a headlock,
Yep.
and I'm going to get walked out of there in cuffs. I'm sorry, I am.
It'll be worth it, though, I think.
Oh, I mean, it'd be pretty cool. I mean, I have to be retired from my current job first because I'm definitely going to lose it after that.
That's funny. So, all right. So we talk about, you want to be aware, you want to be exercising some sort of behavioral, suspicious behavior kind of analysis, right? And you certainly want to ring the alarm when the time is right and not hold it to yourself because you're hurting one feeling. So let's take it a step further. You hear that device, right? And maybe you hear the shots at this point. Assuming that you're unarmed, New York City is very strict in the gun laws, so
extremely strict.
Yeah, there's very little you can do from a response standpoint.
The state itself has its own restrictions, and the city has even more layers of restrictions.
It'd be interesting to see what happens this summer. There's some Supreme Court case that's being heard that may overturn all of that. But in the meantime, it is.
I doubt it.
And it's funny how I heard all these people talking about, well, we need more gun laws. We need more gun laws. I'm like, no, we don't enforce the ones we have. And B, if there were more people with guns there, this probably wouldn't have happened. But people are not seeing it that way.
Right. That's the misconception with firearms laws. They're laws. And who follows laws? Law-abiding citizens.
Right.
And criminals don't follow laws. They always, and I can speak empirically, in my own time as a law enforcement officer, just about 90% of the firearms that I've either myself taken off the street or assisted other officers in doing so were obtained illegally, not legally. So a law is only going to restrict the law-abiding citizen, in my opinion.
100%. And I remember this one guy I arrested, and he was released 2 days prior from gun suspicions, right? The judge just let him walk. Like, the guy was already in custody for gun law violations, and you let him out, and now we're arresting him again. And it's a revolving door.
And I know you agree with me. We're not against regulations at all, background checks, etc. And the people, for some reason, when I talk to friends who I'm going to say don't understand, they're under the assumption that you can, that there's no background checks sometimes, or, and granted, there are some loopholes, but even in those loopholes, like let's say a gun show, they're still calling in a quick background check.
That's not a loophole. That's been debunked. I mean, you cannot sell a gun without a
correct. If you do, you're breaking the law, and again, you're a criminal. There are regulations in place, and there are some things which I'm not going to mention because I know we don't want to get into this discussion. Where me personally, I do agree there should be certain items that shouldn't be so easily accessed. I say that as a concerned citizen with children and as a law enforcement officer. But again, I'm not a politician. I just enforce the laws that are written. But I do have an empirical opinion when it comes to that. But overall, go ahead.
Let me ask you this question, because as a law enforcement officer, right, I know I ran into it. So an event like today, right? What is the average response time of a police officer? Actually, today is not a good example because the subway in New York has law enforcement officers there.
Aside from,
yeah, but for the most part, right? What's average, nationally speaking, response time for a police officer?
It's hard to compare the NYPD considering how many officers they have.
True.
But I mean, you're still talking a minute, 2 minutes,
And that's with the officer in the station somewhere. So when you talk about
if they have an officer in the station.
Yeah, if you get a call in your jurisdiction where you're police, right, without naming locations and anything, right, you get a call. For you to get to the scene, full lights and sirens, right, you're running code. How long does it take you to get an average?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Like currently how I worked as a cop, not a city cop. But I've had anywhere, depending on where I work, from 3 minutes to 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. National average is about 7 minutes, if I remember correctly. So I'm thinking, and again, not to make this conversation about gun laws, but 7 minutes is a long time. A lot of people die in 7 minutes if nobody addresses that individual.
In 7 seconds.
Right. I like you brought Israel as an example, and I know comparing Israel and America is apples and oranges, two
Yeah,
different
you can't
cultures.
compare them at all.
Yeah. But I like talking about this one incident. So we all remember the event at the Pulse disco in Florida, right?
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, 52 fatalities, a significant amount of injured individual.
Yeah. Very,
And I
very
don't,
horrible incident.
yeah, I don't care how proficient the shooter was. And if each one of his rounds actually hit one person once and did the damage, and we know people got hit multiple times, high capacity magazines, right? And I use that term, I don't like using a standard capacity magazine, like a 30 round magazine. He had an AR type farm, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly, right? So 30 rounds. He would have had to change magazines multiple times, which means there would have been lulls in the fire. And now one person there, again, talking about culture and talking about New York today, right? Now one person chose to bomb rush that individual or fight or show any kind of resistance. And I'm comparing that to Israel because there's one event that happened in Israel where uh, three terrorists walked into a coffee house at an area you and I visited actually in Tel Aviv. And the patrons of the restaurant picked up, they weren't armed, they picked up chairs, they picked up whatever, and they resisted those
I
terrorists.
saw this. I think was it on video?
Yeah, I showed you the video. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. It
And
was an older gentleman too.
there were a few of them, yeah, and one of them ran away, one of the terrorists. The other two died there. We ended up with three fatalities. One of them was heart attack, the other two from gunshot. So three attackers with submachine guns versus one attacker with a rifle, and significantly different response or outcome based on the culture of the people there. So, I agree with you. Listen, I'm pro Second Amendment, so I think people should have the right. I do think that they should show that they are,
Correct.
they have the capacity and capability. I'm a big fan of education also. I think
Correct. I would say they need to be proficient and competent in using that because it's a big responsibility.
Yeah, but I don't like limiting that right because I have seen what happens when you do limit that right. But even if you don't have the firearms, right? The people that were on the subway station, hundreds, thousands of them today, right? One assailant, and nobody did anything. Now, that aside, because again, we're not going to change our culture in one podcast. What could those people do that would be of benefit? So one thing you already mentioned, which was just be a good witness. Okay. Get footage, direction of travel, good description of the individual, right? To this point, we're now 8:37 p.m., right? So this is Monday, the day of the event, right? This podcast is not going to drop till today is Tuesday, but it's not going to drop till Monday. So, we're talking 12 hours later, and they still didn't apprehend this individual.
No, they know who he is. They just don't know where he is.
Correct. So some of it is maybe if we had better witnesses, we could have done them a little better, right? The second thing is, and I run into this a lot when I teach at places of worship. Everybody wants to carry a gun at a synagogue or church or whatever. And I always say, listen, I'm not opposed to the idea, but if you guys are not going to seriously invest in training and not to work in a crowd, because think about some of these locations during the height of a service, right? So for Jews, let's say Yom Kippur, or for Christian, let's say midnight mass on Christmas, right? So a lot of people there, and just because you have a gun doesn't make you a good response. Actually, probably in that instance, deploying a gun is not
a problem,
right? But what I tell them is, how about you do invest in trauma care, so we can save lives by making sure those people don't perish.
Right.
And I know a lot of people today did actually start rendering aid, which was pretty cool.
Yes.
And I hope if any of our listeners do take something aside from mindset, is also when you invest in training, probably first aid, trauma care, I would say surpasses firearms. And I'm a big advocate of firearms, but a gun doesn't. I always say I don't think it's the right tool for every job, and more often than not, it's not the right tool for the job. But once you have a gun, people automatically think, well, that's going to solve all my issues. And I'm like, no, you won't. And if that's all you have to rely on, you're in deep shit. So, I think learning some sort of first aid, trauma care is essential.
Absolutely. And, like whenever I travel, even now traveling with my family, there's always a trauma bag in my car. There might not be a firearm, but there's always a trauma bag in my car.
Bullshit on that. There's probably a firearm too.
No, actually, no.
Really?
Yeah, knives, lots of knives. But again, this goes back to our education topic. I'm traveling with little kids. I'm going to be in a house that's not mine. I don't have the hardware to secure my firearms like I do in my home. There's going to be other children here that are not, at least educated like my children, and adults that are not educated with firearms. So I are on the side of caution, and that those are the judgment and educational decisions and judgments that when you take on the responsibility of firearms that you have to think about. And this is why you and I are big proponents of education, because people think, like you said, that a firearm is going to solve all your problems. So it's like, I want a gun because if I go into the fight, I don't know what the bad guy's going to have or not. If he has a gun or he's not. Well, newsflash. Once you make the decision to carry a gun, there is always a gun in every fight you get into, in every place that you go to, and that's your own. And right. And it can easily be turned against you. And this is why education is key. And I agree with you. Before, if it's just the layperson who doesn't have military background, law enforcement background, do your trauma care first. Get the medical training first, because you never know if that firearm is going to hurt you or someone you love or anything like that. So you want to be able to mitigate those problems that can result from firearms, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of responsibility and education that needs to come along with that.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think trauma care and medical training can be applied in so many more circumstances than a firearm. Firearm can help me in one very specific situation, right? There's a life-threatening attack on me or a loved one. But medical care, I can use anywhere. I'm hiking. Oh, yeah. I am when you and I flew to Israel, right? There was a guy in the airplane, right? And we had to go and treat him in the airplane. A gun wouldn't have helped me in that case.
Yeah. And I can tell you, what, like you and I, we always want to make ourselves better. I went from being a CLS in the Army Reserves and, being a trained with basic life saving, TCCC. Then I decided to become an EMT. And, with all that medical skills, I may not be using it regularly, on the streets and whatnot, but I can't tell you how many times I've diagnosed and treated my children. I've diagnosed pneumonia in them and different ailments and, was able to get them the care they needed and tell the doctors XYZ. I've helped my neighbor's child who was choking, happened to have oxygen, in my trauma bag, and did some blowback on the child. By the time the paramedic showed up, I'm like, they got great capillary refill. I've already, run this many cc's of oxygen. Child's breathing, alert, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, okay, why? What do we, what do we do now? Oh, here you go. Write your report and do what you got to do. But everything's taken care of. And I still remember that day because I was in mid poop when she came beating on my door, and I didn't get the wipe. So that's a little TMI there, but
But I think that proves urgency.
Yes. Thankfully, it was one of those ghost poopies, that there was like nothing there. So I was, whew. Yeah, I noticed there was no itchy butt during the whole incident. So I was pretty confident that I was clean. But anyway, not to get off topic.
We don't know if the patient felt better or just wanted you out of their house. Well, so I think we covered a good amount of things that people can start focusing on. I know when you and I, we go to get a drink or we go to a meal, it's always about where we're sitting, so we have the best vantage point, playing little mind games about understanding the environment, right. Exits, so forth. So I would hope that we can encourage some of our listeners to start doing something.
Oh, yeah. My wife hates going on dates because I can tell her every conversation that's going on in the room, who's on a first date, who's been married for a long time, and issues, traumas. And again, I'll be the before, we call it quits, but what is it, the 12th man, the devil's advocate, the 13th man? The 10th man, whatever. You know what I mean.
Depends if you can count or not.
Right. But again, I don't want to throw everyone under the bus. There are people who are just not built for this mentally or physically. But again, you don't have to charge into the fray like probably one of us would do, screaming Valhalla and all kinds of crazy shit. Or, maybe you're just the one that's going to be the good witness, provide medical aid, or maybe you're just the one that has to run away. But don't just stand there and be a victim.
Exactly.
Because at least running away, you're not a victim, and that's the one less person a first responder has to treat and focus on, and they can, address the threats and stuff like that. And I hate to put it that way, but this is war. We address it as crime because it's not on some foreign battlefield, but it's a battle. It's war. Every day it's a war. We never know what's going to happen, and we have to be prepared for it one way or another, whether it's running towards it or running away from it. Make a choice. Make a choice.
This is a great line I heard once, and I use it often when I teach, and I think you've heard me say it before, but you don't choose the fight chooses you. So when the time comes, you have the option of being prepared or not being prepared, and either one is a choice, right?
Yeah,
So
and again, you don't have to have a jetpack, with a minigun attached to it. You don't have to be Iron Man. A couple tourniquets in a backpack. My sisters, one of my sisters works in the city, and she's got a little get out of hell bag that I helped build for her. And mind you, it's the middle of the city she works in, but she's got tourniquets, she's got water purification tablets, she's got finger saws, everything she needs to get through a basic trauma situation, basically to get her home if needs be. And I got that mindset instilled in them. So even when things like this happen, I get that little panic and I'm calling everybody okay, blah, blah, blah. The back of my head is I know they're okay because I kind of started to instill that mindset in them. So their heads are on the swivel. And honestly, and I don't know if she's listening or not, she's probably not. My oldest sister, she'd probably be the one to beat this guy to death, find a kitchen knife from somewhere and probably stab him in the eye with it. True story. She was 6 months pregnant. She chased down my middle sister's mugger with a kitchen knife all the way to the subway station. And this dude was running for his life. So, yeah,
I have so much more respect now, and I like the sister to begin with.
And these are the people who influenced me. All right, let alone they're Puerto Rican women, which are forced to be reckoned with themselves
with a knife.
With a knife.
Well, I think at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to accomplish. If any of our listeners during this episode kind of got one little nugget that they can use, one little kick in the ass to move in the right direction, then mission accomplished sort of thing. And, we talked about the events at the subway today, but there's wars all around us. I mean, we don't have to go as far as the Ukraine even to talk about battlefields, right? I recently I heard just in my neighborhood, and I live in a pretty safe neighborhood, right? And you know where I live. We had some crime going on here. There's police activities all over the place. I wasn't here, but the idea is that the people that were the victims, the reality is that would they have had the tools to better deal with it, would they still be victims?
All right.
And I think that's what it comes down to. Steven, I know you're away, family vacation. I appreciate you making time for us because I just like seeing your pretty face.
It's always a pleasure for everyone that's listening and just discussing these things because they need to know. More people need to talk. More people need to spit the truth because if we don't, who will? We're definitely not going to sugarcoat it. It is what it is. I think people need to get out of the mentality of it's not going to happen to me and get into the mentality of when is it going to happen and let me be ready for it. Because it's, how the saying goes, better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Or in the Japanese.
I was about to say that.
Samurai.
A war in a garden, a gardener in a war.
There you go. You read my mind. That was exactly what
sentences.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Hey, on that note, Steve, I love you. Have a good night, brother.
All right. We'll talk later.
Bye.